Hello, everybody. My name is Shannon Kowalski. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Policy for the International Women's Health Coalition and have been honored to be a participant in the Civil Society Advisory Group for the Generation Equality Forums. It's so exciting to be here with you today. But first off, I wanted to let you know that interpretation is available in English, Spanish, French, and Arabic, as well as sign language. Please click on the globe on the bottom right of your screen in order to choose your channel. Our panelists today will be speaking in Spanish and in English. So we're here this morning to discuss the critical importance of feminist movements in driving progress for gender equality, the challenges we face, and the creative solutions that we're using to overcome them. As feminists advocating for change, we know that our movements are critical in driving
Los intérpretes no escuchan español, por favor.
Is there a problem?
No tenemos español.
We do not have Spanish interpretation.
Por favor, pueden ver. No se oye el español.
Is it working, Tarsila?
No es Spanish. Spanish is mute.
Okay. Can I get an indication from somebody whether we can fix that?
Yes, so we're working on it. Tarsila y todo el mundo en español. Estamos trabajando esto y lo resolveremos en un segundo. So Shannon, we're working on it. If you can just give us a second, we can give you an indication. Apologies.
Thanks, Amelia.
No problem. Con tal que no sea mi computadora.
No, interpretation is critical.
We are always suffering because the connection is like ice, or in other case, fall down.
So for those who are just joining, we're just waiting to fix an interpretation issue and then we'll get back to the start of our panel. Okay.
Entonces, solo dos hablamos español en este panel, ¿no?
Yes. Sí.
Finally, Shannon
okay,
and
Emilia, can you kindly translate until the Spanish?
I will be providing a translation until this is fixed.
Okay, great. Thank you, Amelia. Great. So let's get back to it.
Cutting quickly.
We are here this morning to discuss the critical importance of feminist movements in driving progress for gender equality, the challenges we face, and the creative solutions that we're using to overcome them. So as feminists...
Estamos aquí para hacerle frente a los obstáculos por los que pasan los movimientos feministas y los pasos a seguir adelante.
As feminists advocating for change, we know that our movements are critical in driving social change, for compelling governments to act, and to holding them to account. Research...
Como actores de cambio, sabemos que somos críticas para...
¿No es simultáneo? It's not simultáneo?
Apologies. Until the problem is fixed in the technical... with the technical team, I will be translating right after Shannon, if that's okay. Tarsila, en lo que En lo que resuelven este problema, voy yo a traducir después de Shannon, muy rápido.
Okay, research done over the past decades has shown clearly that the most significant driver of policy change on gender equality and women's rights is the presence of strong and autonomous women's and girls' movements.
Las investigaciones han mostrado que el factor más importante para el cambio es las mujeres que hacen esta lucha.
We've seen it time and again, from the Green Wave in Argentina to the Repeal the 8th campaign in Ireland, feminist civil society mobilization, not progressive political parties, women in government, or national wealth are the key drivers of policy change.
Lo hemos visto desde la marea verde hasta la campaña de Repeal en Irlanda, que los factores más importantes no son cambios de políticas públicas, sino los movimientos feministas.
We also know that when women's organizations work together and in partnership with other progressive movements and sectors, that they're more successful in pushing change at a faster pace.
Sabemos que cuando los movimientos feministas trabajan con otros sectores, son más efectivos para lograr el cambio.
And this is the secret sauce that we're trying to unleash with the Generation Equality Forums and the Action Coalitions.
Este es el ingrediente secreto que estamos tratando de catalizar con el Foro Generación Igualdad.
Bringing together distinct partners around a common vision to make progress on gender equality and women's, girls, and gender diverse people's human rights irreversible.
Y esto es lo que necesitamos para hacer la igualdad de género irreversible.
But at this particular moment, the threats facing feminist movements globally are immense.
En este momento particular estamos en un momento muy difícil.
So we're seeing trends of restrictions on civil society organizing and funding.
Estamos viendo muchas restricciones y muchas olas de restricciones.
The rise of anti-human rights movements globally that are confronting the work of feminist movement head on.
Estamos viendo muchos movimientos de derecha que están confrontando a los movimientos feministas.
Oh, great, we have interpretation back. Fantastic. We're also seeing the impacts of global crises like climate change, COVID-19, ongoing economic crises, where so often it's the feminist and grassroots organizations and movements who are filling the gaps left by governments. And they are doing all of this on a shoestring. According to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, only 1% of the money available for gender equality is going directly to women's and girls' organizations.
Excuse me, we don't have Spanish interpretation, my dear.
It's still not working, Tarsila? They said that it would be working now.
No. We are in Spanish and we are listening you, Shannon. If we have to listen you and we try to do in Spanglish, like always, but we need to understand you.
Our sincerest apologies. They are working on it. I will continue to translate. Perdón, Tarsila, voy a seguir traduciendo.
Gracias, Emilia. I am thrilled to be joined by 7 panelists to talk about some of their key priorities, the challenges that they have encountered in their work, and good practices and strategies to ensure the continuity of their work.
Hoy tenemos a 7 panelistas que nos van a hablar de las prioridades de su trabajo, de los obstáculos que han encontrado y de los pasos a seguir.
Okay, so let me introduce our panelists. First, we have Karen Ellemann Klug, who is a Danish politician and a member of the Folketing for the Venstre political party. I hope I pronounced that correctly. She is a former minister, having held the positions of Minister of Fisheries Equality and Nordic Cooperation, Minister of the Environment, and Minister of the Interior and Social Affairs.
Primero vamos a presentar a Karen Leman, que es una política danesa. Sí.
Mercy Shehu is a promoter of women and youth rights, and she possesses more than 6 years of experience working in this field. She currently works with the Observatory for Youth and Children, an NGO in Albania which works with young Roma women, among many other things.
Mercy Shehu es una activista feminista. Activismo de juventud.
Amelia, I'm having a hard time hearing you now. I'm not wondering if others might be as well.
Sorry,
I think the same issue.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
Hear me better now?
A little bit. The challenges of meeting in global forums. Cecilia Chacon Castillo is currently Secretary of Human Rights and President of the Mixed Justice Commission of Ecuador. She has a long history as an activist for the human rights of children and women in Ecuador and across Latin America and the Caribbean. Her bio is impressive, but the one thing that really stood out to me is her work organizing open dialogues between social organizations and governments in order to impact policy. And so I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that today.
La ministra Cecilia Chacón es ministra de Derechos Humanos en Ecuador. Ha hecho mucho trabajo para abrir el diálogo entre movimientos sociales y gobierno.
Okay, Lopa Banerjee is the director of the Civil Society Division at UN Women, and she leads UN Women's work on partnering with and supporting women's rights groups and civil society networks around the world. Lopa is also the executive coordinator of the Generation Equality Forum, and I can say emphatically that it's her vision and her drive that has brought us here together today. So thank you, Lopa.
Lopa Banerjee es directora de relación con sociedad civil en ONU Mujeres. Podemos decir con certeza que Lopa Banerjee ha sido un actor muy importante en determinar el foro Generación Igualdad.
Okay. Monica Aleman is a senior program officer on the Build program of the Ford Foundation in New York City. And she's working to advance the foundation's efforts to support and develop stronger, sustainable, and more effective social justice organizations around the world. And I've been lucky to work with Monica for a long time, having first met her when she was at Madre a number of years ago. Thank you, Monica. Next,
Mónica Alemán, Mónica Alemán es directora senior de programa en la Fundación Ford y trabaja en el programa Build, que está diseñando una nueva manera de dar fondos a organizaciones de sociedad civil.
Tarsila Rivera Zea is a Quechua activist, a member of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues since her election in 2016. She also helped to create the permanent workshop of Andean and Amazonian Indigenous Women of Peru and the Center of Indigenous Cultures of Peru, Chirapac, where she was formerly president and is now vice president. She's also the coordinator of the Continental Liaison for Indigenous Women of the Americas, ACMEA. And I've also been lucky to work with Tarsila for quite some time and have been inspired by her vision and leadership.
Tarsila Rivera Zea es una activista, directora y cofundadora de Chirapac y también colaboradora del Fondo Internacional de Mujeres Indígenas.
Okay. Kitoria Wirengane chairs the network of young women leaders in Mozambique. She's also resident analyst in the STV national TV program called Opinion on Gender Lens. She was the first young woman to be a national electoral representative with the party Nova Democracia in Mozambique. And she has an incredible list of accomplishments. We're thrilled to have her with us today.
Quiteria Kirangane es una activista joven de Mozambique que ha trabajado, representado a la juventud en varios programas y agencias en Mozambique.
Great. So Lopa, I'm going to start with you. So from your position working with feminist and women's rights movements around the world, you have a bit of a bird's eye view of the power of these organizations and movements. And so I wanted to ask you, what do you see that makes feminist movements powerful? And what do we gain and what do we lose if they're not part of the mix?
Thank you so much for that question, Shannon. And first, let me greet all my fellow feministas on this panel and also welcome to the Generation Equality Forum. Thank you so much to the government of Mexico and the government of France for co-hosting it. Thank you so much to civil society and young feminists for your leadership and partnership in this enterprise and this idea that we are all embarking on. Do I stop for the translation?
Yes, thank you, Lopa. Lopa Banerjee ha dicho que está muy contenta de estar aquí, agradece al gobierno de México, agradece a Francia y sobre todo agradece a sociedad civil por estar aquí para poder seguir adelante en el Foro Generación e Igualdad para llegar a la acción.
Thank you so much to Mexico for kicking this off, and it is really exciting to be here on this panel, actually the plenary panel on women's leadership and this panel on feminist movements, which I think are at the heart of the Generation Equality Forum.
Es un honor estar en este panel, sobre todo en este panel y en el panel de liderazgos feministas. Es el corazón del Foro Generación Igualdad.
Shannon, I'm going to respond to your question with three points. First, why are feminist movements important and what do we lose if we don't have strengthened, robust, supported feminist movements that can promote their activism safely across the world? I'm going to talk about the fact that this is critically linked to the issue of democracy. If we look at the ways in which democracies have developed across the world, anti-racism, anti-colonialism, anti-apartheid, everywhere feminist movements, intersectional feminist movements were at the core of building democracies. Today, we are in a situation where the notion of democracy is evolving. Democracy is not a static idea. It is a constantly evolving idea, and it is not something that stays, but it is something that we endeavor at every single day.
Lopa ha mencionado que los movimientos feministas son críticos para la democracia. Los movimientos feministas han estado en el corazón de la construcción de las democracias y las democracias en sí no son una idea estática, sino cambia y es alimentada por los movimientos feministas.
I can't hear Amelia very well, so somebody just, okay, now.
Lopa, I think you might just turn your translation off if you want to hear me better, sorry.
Will somebody signal to me when Amelia is finished, because I can't? Okay, thank you, Shannon. So we are at a moment in time today.
Todavía no tenemos simultáneo.
Sorry?
Tarsila, nos están diciendo que ya funciona la traducción.
Ya tenemos.
Okay, so is it simultaneous now?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I will continue. So we are at a moment in time right now where we are seeing all over the world the growth of illiberal democracies. Not just that, the growth of elected autocracies. So in other words, the process and the enterprise of democracy itself, by trusting that people will vote to elect governments that are inclusive and plural, that idea is now challenged and flawed. Therefore, the role of feminist movements, women's movements, and young people's movements in all their intersectionality is absolutely crucial to hold fast to the idea that democracy serves all those who live in it. And from that perspective, women's movements, feminist movements, intersectional movements bring to the center the arguments, the discourse, the demands that would otherwise not be heard. To me, the second point that I want to raise is the issue, the enduring power of protest. And I don't just mean a protest, just mobilizing on the streets. I mean the manner in which feminist movements all over the world strategize thoroughly, effectively, with lawyers, with communities, with journalists, with art activists, with different aspects of of society and social influences, to build the strategies to challenge undemocratic notions in courts, in the media, the thoroughness with which cases are built, unevenly but indisputably in courts, to challenge discriminatory legislation, to challenge discriminatory practices, and most importantly, to challenge discriminatory policies. So the role of feminist movements in upholding a plural, equal, just democracy is absolutely central if we are going to have democratic communities and societies. And finally, what do we lose? We lose a world that we have all built up to this point in time, which is a world that is where we can all dream of equality and justice. The notion of justice and equality for all is compromised and deeply, deeply eroded if we do not have strengthened, resourced feminist movements that have a voice at the table and that have an environment that is enabling for them to be able to operate. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you so much, Lupa. And strengthened, resourced feminist movements, I think that's one of the things that are absolutely critical and one of the things that we're still lacking after all of these years. So I'm going to turn now to Mercy. Mercy, you've been doing activism for gender equality in Albania for a number of years now. And I wanted to ask you if you could share with us an example from your own work that demonstrates what makes feminist and women's rights movements and grassroots organizations successful.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Shannon. It is really an honor for me to be part of this panel, especially to be part of this strong, diverse women who share the gender equality within their hearts. Actually, I would firstly address something that it is particularly important to highlight, and I think it sets the path for everything that we discussed further. We talk a lot about setting the standards of gender equality. However, I indeed believe it is not just a standard. It's a minimum condition we should have to ensure the well-being of girls and women wherever they are in the world. And I face it here in Albania. Women face several challenges, and you can see it. For example, currently, I am working on a case of providing a young woman from marginalized communities access to education system and employment opportunities. And you can see how weak the system is, starting from the mentality of the people that are across and are near to the girl, her own mentality actually, that has influenced for so long her, but also you can see how the system is not yet ready to fully back up and support her within her new journey. So they are real stories, they are real people, they are real cases, and whatever we do, even if we help her, still it's not enough. It's not enough because there are so many other girls who may need support from our side. So I think this is particularly important. Of course, we start from somewhere. It's an achievement, but yet I think we have so far to go further. So I think there are cases of successful even here in Albania, but yet I think our journey remains far away from where we should be. And another thing that I would really shortly like to point is the fact that I am here today because many women set the path for me. And I think it is similar. What we have achieved today, it is because we owe to every girl, every woman who never gave up to and allowed and create the space for us to be here today. So I think whatever we discussed, we keep in mind that we owe to them who set the path for us to be here today, to continue strongly together.
Thank you so much, Mercy. And I think you highlighted two things for me. One is the importance of systemic change. And I think that's one of the powerful things that feminists have really worked for, is recognizing that the personal is political, but we also need to change the systems that we're operating within in order to have that change. But also the importance of mentorship and building that next generation of feminist leadership. And we are so excited to have you as part of our movement and to be continuing this work. I'm now going to turn to Tarsila. Tarsila, the same question for you. From your own experiences in Peru, working at the intersections of women's rights and indigenous people's rights, could you give us an example of how the movements you are part of have been able to drive change? And what made them so powerful?
En primer lugar, en los últimos 30 años, tenemos que reconocer que el esfuerzo intergeneracional y de generaciones son importantes, porque hemos aprendido, hemos fortalecido nuestras capacidades de diálogo también con el movimiento amplio. Y entonces podemos decir ahora que estamos en una etapa de construir y de fortalecer alianzas para construir y luchar por una agenda común como los objetivos de lograr la igualdad de género. Eso me parece importantísimo, teniendo en cuenta algo que Lopa comentó, ¿no? Venimos de sociedades colonizadas y racistas, y esas prácticas colonizantes y racistas han retrasado justamente el diálogo entre las diferencias, incluyendo el movimiento de mujeres o el movimiento feminista. Porque todos nosotras trabajamos por convicciones que tienen que ver a acceder al respeto y a vida plena. Entonces, si se reproducen las formas coloniales de sentirse mejor que otros, pues es una barrera tremenda que retrasa los procesos de alianza y de construcción de agenda común. En ese sentido, de lo local a lo global, podemos decir que hemos encontrado movimientos sociales y de mujeres más abiertas, más respetuosas y también abiertas al diálogo, ¿no? Porque ahora se hablan de los feminismos con S y las indígenas estamos acuñando violencias con S para que justamente cuando hablemos del impacto del cambio climático podamos también mirar cómo la interseccionalidad se ve mucho más afectada en el caso de mujeres, indígenas, niñas o afrodescendientes, o los sectores que todavía no están como protagonistas en propia voz y en propia persona. Entonces, yo creo que es una gran oportunidad todo lo que nos pasa, incluyendo la pandemia, porque nos permite mirarnos hacia adentro para mirar el colectivo y mirar el futuro. Y ahí es donde nos encontramos todas las diferencias, tratando de aportar, de construir, pero también de hacernos escuchar y aprender a escuchar a otros. Yo creo que el movimiento feminista va por buen camino porque nadie quiere un movimiento feminista solo de intelectuales, solo de académicas o solo de mujeres, digamos, de clase alta. Justamente el feminismo que se articula en las diversidades, dialogando y encontrando propuestas comunes, va a caminar hacia el logro de la igualdad de género entre los géneros también, ¿no? Ese sería mi aporte. Yo siempre estoy bien esperanzada en todo lo que podemos hacer las mayores, las actuales, y también mucha fuerza para la juventud con una mirada diferente en esto, que somos diversidades, pero mirando hacia el mismo lado. Y ahí nos necesitamos todas. Las que ponen los boletos, las que abren el escenario y las que soñamos con mundos diferentes. Gracias.
Thanks, Tarsila. And the point that you make about it not just being a feminist approach, but intersectional feminist approach, and really interrogating our differences, being open to conversation and dialogue, and bringing everybody along with us, I think is really critical. So you're right. That's the future that we're trying to construct, one that is really representative of the diversity of our movements. So now turning to Kitaria, you have experience both within government and grassroots organizations. And I was wondering if you could share from your perspective an example or your views of how feminist and grassroots organizations and movements you've worked with have driven change, and what have been some of the things that have made them impactful?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this invitation. As the president of the Mozambican Young Women Leaders Network, I can say, first let me share that now women in Mozambique are facing a triple war. We have terrorism in the north of the country, we have military conflict in the center of the country, and we have, as you all, the COVID-19 pandemic at the national level, while we're still recovering from Idai, Kennedy, and the Lois cyclones. In this specific moment, I'm talking to you, women are hidden in the bushes, listening to the sound of guns and perhaps being raped due to terrorism in a land that promised them richness coming from the gas revenue. Some of these women are members of the Young Women Leaders Network. So we have been engaged at all levels to assure that women can be recognized as part of society, because there is no social justice or no sustainable development without women inclusion. And let me tell you that for us, representation, we need to assure representation, equal resource allocation, and the consideration of different realities of young women and women in Mozambique at an international level. Women are still treated as a mere statistic to comply with international community equality standards. And let me tell you a recent story of a well-known civil society women activist who was recently appointed to integrate the National Commission of Election. During an internal meeting to designate spokesperson, the political party in power recommended the vote for continuity on a man who is there for more than 10 years. The other members from civil society and not only suggested that at least this activist would be a better choice as the national spokesperson of the National Commission of Election. And Alice was elected last week with the majority of votes. And on the 3rd of this month, she was called by the ruling party to resign. They made her to write a letter, and she delivered the letter last week saying that she doesn't have capabilities to rule, to be the national spokesperson. So this shows that we still have really challenged to the protection of women rights defenders, and many of them are still being erased, some of them even intimidated, including of releasing their intimate videos if they do not behave as they usually say. So there are a lot of challenges. We have conflict, terrorism challenge, we have political challenge, we have humanitarian challenge. So as the Young Women Leaders Network, we have been securing humanitarian assistance to displaced people with a gender perspective, as well as assistance to gender-based violence. We have also been hosting high-level dialogues on women, peace and security, engaging government, parliament, defense forces, UN, academy, private sector, religious groups, and cooperation partners, so that we can discuss how Resolution 1325 can be turned into reality to respond to the challenge of these women facing terrorism and not only. We have been holding, and I invite you all to visit, although it's in Portuguese, we have been holding the first digital exhibition that is Mozambique under Gender Lens. That is an exhibition that you can find in amaze.me/2020 Género. That is an exhibition to raise attention to the different realities and challenges that women faced in 2020. So it's a way of innovating in responding to the challenges of women. And we are also setting up a national database of young women leaders, both at feminist organizations, at the grassroots movements, and informal groups, so that we can join together efforts and solidarity amongst young women leaders, linking training and supporting young women leaders so that we can respond and we can resist to all forms of violence against women. And as you said before, I'm the youngest women leader in Mozambique. That is a commentator to a national TV show that talks about political analysis. So this is a way that we also raise our voices and make sure that all those issues that young women are facing, but also all women are facing all across the country can have a voice to be raised, and we can resist to all forms of violence, representing all these women and giving them a voice and a space to visibility. And at last, we have been advocating for equality in representation, resource allocation, and also accountability, including through a robust media campaign on peace and security. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for reminding us of the context that you're working in and the very real attacks that we're facing on women human rights defenders. We just finished the Commission on the Status of Women last week, and that was one of the most challenging conversations around the agreed conclusions, and we didn't make the progress that we wanted to see, so we still have a huge amount of work to do there. But one point in particular that you made about supporting young feminists to lead, I think is really critical, because the most effective movements that we see are the ones that are generative, that really focus on building that leadership and uniting young feminists around a common vision as well. I'm going to turn now to Minister Chacon. Cecilia, from your experience working with diverse movements and now the government in Ecuador, what are some of the challenges that you see for women's movements in complex settings?
Gracias, buenos días a todas y a todos. Bueno, la gran mayoría ha hablado que desde hace 30 años el movimiento de mujeres ha tenido un rol protagónico en el mundo y sobre todo en América Latina. Yo quiero recordar que hace 30 años en mi ciudad natal no había una sola universidad. Y al no haber una sola universidad, las mujeres, las jóvenes en ese entonces, teníamos que emigrar a la capital con la finalidad de poder tener una oportunidad, no solo para estudiar, sino de volver a nuestras ciudades para garantizar que los jóvenes podamos también apoyar a nuestras ciudades. ¿Qué tiene que ver esto con el movimiento de mujeres? Pues muchísimo, porque es el movimiento de mujeres el que ha ido garantizando que el acceso y el esfuerzo hacia los derechos de salud, de educación, derechos sexuales y reproductivos estén dentro de la política pública. Hoy, como mujer, como militante del movimiento de mujeres, como una ex viceprefecta de mi provincia, hoy como ministra, constato que ha habido un cambio importantísimo. Hoy en mi ciudad natal ya hay universidades, pero eso no significa que han desaparecido los desafíos importantes. Uno de ellos, promover que el movimiento de mujeres deje de ser esta visión elitista de las capitales de los países o una visión elitista de las capitales de provincias o departamentos. El movimiento de mujeres tiene un gran desafío para multiplicarse en todos los territorios y de igual manera acogernos a todas, las jóvenes, las grandes, nuestras madres, nuestras ancestras, que nos han abierto el camino fundamental para que hoy, por ejemplo, estemos aquí pudiendo promover este espacio de diálogo y acompañamiento. En mi país, el movimiento de mujeres es un movimiento que amerita esta consolidación, un diálogo permanente, un fortalecimiento también del movimiento de mujeres, y que hoy más que nunca le presenta una agenda política desde las mujeres a los que hoy en este momento quieren ser presidentes de mi país. Estamos viviendo un momento de transición y por lo tanto esta agenda que no vemos, no sentimos que se haya apropiado, que esté internamente y sea de convicción de los candidatos, realmente repercuta en la política pública futura. Por lo tanto, es necesario que el movimiento de mujeres articule este esfuerzo para no quedarnos en el camino de la lucha, de la pelea, sino también del encuentro y del encuentro con los hitos, con los logros, con las concreciones. Y entonces esta agenda tiene que ver ahora con la multiplicidad, con la diversidad de los esfuerzos que podamos ahora hacerlo desde el movimiento de mujeres, que es hoy más que nunca una esperanza que fortalece sobre todo la convicción, desde las más jóvenes a las más adultas. Gracias. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You make a really important point about the fact that the work of women's movements is long and it is diverse. And I'm not sure that our work will ever be done, but celebrating those milestones and looking for those opportunities along the way to influence change and to influence policy, I think is really important. So now I'm going to turn to Karen. Karen, could you, from your perspective and your experience as a politician, but also as an activist, what should we be taking on board as we both work within movements and with governments to support our work as a feminist movement? What are some of the key lessons that you have learned?
Well, thank you very much for giving me the floor, and it's really a joy to listen to all of you with very important statements. And I'm sitting here in the cold Denmark, northern part of Europe right now. And as many of you might know, when we do all these benchmarks, we always say, oh, we do so well on gender equality in the Nordic countries. And yes, that's right. But I really appreciate that you also mentioned that this comes with focus and with a lot of work, and we're standing on the shoulders of proud women and men in generations before us. And that will be one of my points here this afternoon, is that it's very important that we also remember to actually include men and boys in these discussions. Because when we insist on actually bringing girls and women's right to the table, we have this dialogue with the men and with the boys to actually make space so we are all around the table, because equality is for everyone, no matter gender, no matter sexual orientation, no matter gender identity. So that would be one of my important points. Don't forget the men and the boys in these very important discussions, because a lot of them, not all, but a lot of them very much do agree with us. And then I think what is also very important for all of us is that we have to continue challenging the social norms and the gender stereotypes. They are still there, and we all need to look into the way we raise our children, the way we talk to our daughters about what kind of education, what kind of job, what kind of life do you want to make for yourself. So that will also be one of my points, that we have to continue challenging our social norms. And then it's extremely important that we keep on creating networks and forums to have this ongoing open dialogue. And my colleague from Albania, you made, I think, a very important point, that you keep on showcasing the progress made. You also do that in Mozambique, you just told us. I think it's very important that we make these kind of reports, these kind of benchmarks, so we keep on challenging the progress. Because as Lopez said in the beginning, our democracies are indeed challenged, and lots of nations do not even have democracy. So there's so much work to be done, but I think these milestones, these accomplishments, they shall be, and they need to be celebrated and explained. How did we actually get there? How do we keep on having the dialogue? How do we keep on insisting on equal opportunities? I think I will try to make this one short, because then I might be able to save some of the minutes for second round. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn now to Monica. Monica, your program at the Ford Foundation specifically focused on building the capacities, resiliencies of organizations and movements. So I wonder if you could share, from your perspective, what are some of the key challenges that the organizations and movements that you work with face? And what is it that really makes them successful?
Inicio por darte las gracias, Shannon, por invitarme a ser parte de esta conversación. Inicio también por darle las gracias al gobierno de México y al gobierno de Francia, y por reconocer el trabajo incansable de LOPA para lograr que este foro se hiciera realidad. Así que primero con eso. Segundo, contarles que yo trabajo para la Fundación Ford. La Fundación Ford es una de las filantropías más grandes en el mundo, ¿verdad? Y en los últimos 30 años hemos sido conscientes que para poder nosotros lograr nuestros objetivos de avanzar la justicia social, tenemos que tener
una relación estratégica con los movimientos de mujeres y en particular con el movimiento feminista. Y esto lo hemos hecho de forma muy concreta. Lo hemos hecho facilitando recursos financieros para organizaciones de mujeres. Solo en este año 2020, nuestra asignación de recursos dirigida a organizaciones de mujeres alrededor del mundo va a ser de más de 100 millones de dólares. Y hemos tomado, además de eso, una decisión estratégica. Y la decisión estratégica que hemos tomado es de que no solo vamos a dar recursos, pero sino que lo vamos a dar desde una perspectiva donde reconocemos que la prioridad debe ser en el sur global. En tu pregunta me haces reflexionar un poco, ¿verdad?, de por qué no hemos avanzado al ritmo que hemos querido avanzar. Y yo te diría 3 cosas. La primera razón del por qué no hemos avanzado es porque no hemos financiado al movimiento feminista en la manera que necesita el movimiento feminista para resolver la escala de los problemas que están tratando. La segunda razón por la que no se ha hecho tanto avance es porque no hemos logrado institucionalizar ciertos mecanismos, ¿verdad?, que estén orientados a tener políticas de financiamiento feminista, ¿verdad? Sí han habido financiamiento, pero no financiamiento feminista. Y por lo tanto, cuando los recursos fluyen, no fluyen con una serie de valores que permiten que estos recursos sean orientados a las causas que deben ser orientados. Y la tercera razón es que creo que el movimiento feminista, ¿verdad?, también ha sido parte del problema en cuanto a plantearse las soluciones, porque hemos dejado de lado a ciertos sectores de la sociedad a la hora que presentamos nuestras demandas, ¿verdad? Y hemos dejado a sectores y a grupos de poblaciones que han sido históricamente excluidos, grupos tales como las personas con discapacidad, como a las mujeres negras, como a las mujeres indígenas, donde no han sido parte central de la agenda del movimiento feminista. Así que yo creo que esas son 3 grandes áreas que realmente nos tocaría a nosotros trabajar para poder realmente empezar a empujar un proceso de transformación. Y tu segunda parte de tu pregunta es, ¿qué estamos haciendo nosotros en una institución como la Fundación Ford? Y te diría yo que estamos haciendo 2 cosas. Lo primero es entendiendo la realidad de una forma más concreta. Creo que es muy bonito para instituciones como la Ford sentarse en sus edificios bonitos en diferentes partes del mundo y creer que tenemos la solución a los problemas. Y la realidad es que no tenemos la solución a los problemas. La solución de los problemas está en las organizaciones de mujeres. Y hemos tomado una decisión estratégica y política como institución de poder poner nuestro oído y nuestro corazón y nuestra mente al servicio de empezar a entender la realidad para que nuestros programas sean respondan mucho mejor a ir resolviendo los problemas que se están dando. Y lo segundo que estamos haciendo, estamos cambiando los mecanismos en la forma en las que estamos dando los recursos, ¿verdad? Estamos tratando de financiar de forma más directa a las organizaciones de mujeres en el sur global, entendiendo, ¿verdad?, de que esta idea de la falta de capacidad es una idea que nace del complejo de superioridad y de la supremacía blanca y que nace del colonialismo, ¿verdad? Entonces nosotros estamos rompiendo esta brecha y diciéndonos a nosotros mismos que estamos haciendo un compromiso de financiar directamente a las organizaciones, sea donde estén. Creo que esos son algunos de los puntos que me gustaría tomar hasta ahora, Shannon. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Monica. And I think you've touched on some really important points for us to be taking forward, the importance of trusting and listening to women's organizations and responding to what they need, giving them funding directly rather than going through intermediaries, and trying to give them support that is not responding to foundation priorities, but their own. That kind of unrestricted funding is really important to sustaining this work. So I'm conscious of time, and I know that we want to have some time for robust discussion with those participating in this session. So I have one quick question for each of you. What is one or two specific actions that governments, the private sector, international funds, or others should prioritize to support the work of feminist groups and organizations? And Monica, you have already answered, but is there anything additional that you wanted to add?
Bueno, yo creo en realidad que lo principal que podemos hacer instituciones como la Fundación Ford y otras instituciones, incluyendo a las bilaterales y a las multilaterales, es centrar nuestra perspectiva de las soluciones en las mujeres que han sido históricamente excluidas y marginalizadas. Centrar los recursos y la atención en las múltiples expresiones del movimiento feminista y de forma particular atendiendo la situación de las mujeres indígenas, de las mujeres negras y de las mujeres con discapacidad. Gracias.
Thank you, Monica. Lopa, I'm going to turn it to you. I know you need to leave early.
Thank you so much, Shannon. In fact, I'll pick up from where Monica left off, and I also want to refer, if you will allow me, Shannon, to actually reference something that Karen said about male advocates for gender equality. So to the point about what should we be doing as institutions, from a perspective of where I sit, the United Nations as a multilateral system, I think what we have done with the Generation Equality Forum, which is center the importance of movements, these intersectional movements, intergenerational, multi-stakeholder movement that is at the core of generation equality. So centering movements, the focus on building coalitions, that again has happened through the forum. And in fact, the forum has highlighted where coalitions exist, the importance of coalition, and then strength, voice, and influence. We have seen how the forum has transformed the discussions on critical issues, from economic empowerment to economic justice, dealing with issues of climate justice, talking about bodily autonomy, talking about intersectionality, the importance of collective bargaining, looking at LGBTI rights, looking at race, this kind of intersectional discussion that is necessary at this point in time in order for governments to operate with more transparency and accountability. So for the UN, for the multilateral system to really pay attention to movements and to recognizing that movements and strengthening movements is the next step, is the contemporary multilateral agenda should be looking at how movements strengthen the discourse and the standards around human rights, justice, peace, and equality. And in that context, I also want to reference what Ellen said about the role of men and boys. And I think that is absolutely crucial, but I think that what is even more important in our work with men and boys is really asking for men to cede space. Male allyship. This, you know, we keep talking about men as gender equality advocates, yes, but given that 70% of leadership and positions of influence in the world are occupied by men, for men to be allies, feminist allies, and allies in the gender equality movement, the first and most important action of accountability has to be for them to cede space. So male leaders to create the conditions where they are ceding space for women, for young people, for people in all their diversity, to be represented at the table so that governments can respond with policies that respond to everybody in their communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Lopa. Karen, I am going to now turn to you. What do you think one or two key things that governments, in your case, should be doing to support women's movements?
Well, I think you need to grab more basically, because having feminist movements in every single country, you need to invite them to the table. You need to make in parliament and in government, you need to make these kind of, I would call them natural meeting points, where you actually have, that's why I mentioned benchmarking in my previous points, because when you have these maybe yearly or every second year upcoming benchmarks that are actually maybe even adopted in parliament, then you are forced to have this dialogue and you're forced to face the facts. So that will be one point. And then, I mean, it's still very basic, and I need to say it also in this panel. I mean, we must make sure that young people have access to comprehensive sexuality education. This is the only way that you are able as a human being to actually make your informed choices about your life, about your body, about your sexuality. And that's the very basic to actually move on forward in a more equal world with equal opportunities. And then I think also keep on discussing this very important issue about contraception. Sorry, I forgot the name. Contraception, and making sure that you have access to safe and legal abortion. This is also the whole basic matter of making this a health discussion, making this a human rights discussion. The will and the need to decide over your own body, to be in charge of your own life, to decide when, with whom, and how many children you want. So, of course, this is basic core and something you always discuss in the feminist movement, but this should be broadened out, and that's why you have to have this access to government and parliament. And one last point. In our parliament, we have made these all-party networks. I'm chairman of our all-party SRHR network. We have basically all political parties joining this all-party working group. We are more than 60 members, and by the way, 25 of them are male members. So making sure that you make these kind of well-organized forums also within parliament and of course in government as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Minister Chacon, the same question for you. One or two things that absolutely need to be done in order to support women's movements.
Thank you. Hace años atrás, mi maestro de Derechos Humanos empezaba a explicar la historia de los derechos humanos del hombre. Y lo repetía permanentemente y algún momento le decía, teacher, please, hablemos de los derechos de hombres y mujeres. Y me decía, ok, muy bien, muy bien. Y volvió nuevamente y decía, vamos a pensar en la historia de los derechos del hombre. Me miró y me dijo, oh sí, de las mujeres también, ¿no? Y pensaba que nos está dando como un regalo, como un favor, hablar de los derechos de las mujeres. Eso es lo que no puede pasar ahora ni en la política pública, ni en un Estado que cree que si se llama moderno, un Estado moderno, puede dejar de hablar de los derechos humanos de las mujeres y de sus generaciones. Eso en la actualidad no se podría pensar. Por ello, es necesario sobre todo que los mecanismos de igualdad de género tengan un rol importantísimo para la formulación de la política pública. Estoy de acuerdo con lo que ha dicho Mónica y Yopa en que es necesario mirarnos en un espejo de cuerpo entero para mirarnos todas, en todos nuestros niveles, en todas nuestras formas, demandas y necesidades, y que esta agenda refleje estos orientadores de igualdad para cerrar estas brechas de diferencia que existen en el Estado, en la política pública y entre nosotras también las mujeres. Y esto implica ir cada vez más pensando en presupuestos más coherentes, con equipos técnicos también cada vez más sensibles y sensibilizados a la perspectiva de las realidades de las mujeres y entrar en un proceso que lo hemos hecho como ahora el Foro de Generación Igualdad, en la cooperación permanente. Y hoy, por ejemplo, mi país, por fin de un poquito de años de lucha, de ir pensando y arriesgando, somos parte del Fondo Spotlight que permite orientar acciones conjuntas entre el Estado, y este ha sido un proceso de diálogo abierto, sincero y transparente con la sociedad civil a fin de poder promover prevención y erradicación del femicidio, que es uno de los males modernos y agravados, crueles, en las que las mujeres estamos y que la política pública tiene que mirar en su integralidad, porque el negar o invisibilizar o velar el problema de las mujeres simplemente va a ser no atacar los problemas verdaderos de la sociedad. Los problemas de las mujeres son los problemas de la sociedad, y los problemas de la sociedad tienen que ir acompañados de política pública. Por eso también hemos impulsado con nuestro aporte al acuerdo de ministras en la Conferencia Regional sobre la Condición de la Mujer en CEPAL, donde promovemos que los estados deben seguir apostando en una buena práctica conjunta, y que esta va a ser la única manera de responder y avanzar a los logros en la promoción y progresividad de los derechos de las mujeres. Juntas en esta generación igualdad queremos abogar, seguir construyendo de nuevo mejor esta nueva normalidad que aspiramos que realmente sea diferente, disruptiva desde la construcción de las mujeres, desde la inclusión y la integración de la gran diversidad a la cual nos pertenecemos, y que en este foro hemos probado que somos distintas, diversas, generacionalmente incluyentes, y que este debería ser el reflejo más profundo, que el foro en México llegue a Francia con esta vocación de mirarnos en el espejo de cuerpo entero. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much. Tarsila, I'm going to turn to you now. And I was wondering if you could say from your perspective, what are the one or two things that governments, private sector and others should be doing to support the work of feminist groups and organizations?
Necesitamos mucha alianza sólida, porque se necesita apoyo político, ¿no es cierto? Por ejemplo, nos gustaría que los estados pudieran incluir en los mecanismos de la mujer a nivel nacional una dirección específica con programas y presupuesto propio para mujeres indígenas y afrodescendientes. ¿Por qué? Porque en países donde, por ejemplo, en nuestra región somos casi 55 millones las mujeres indígenas. Entonces, si tuviéramos esos programas específicos, se podría dar atención a todo lo que está pendiente, porque nuestros estados se comprometen a la Agenda 2030, pero cuando bajamos a las políticas nacionales, las mujeres, o sea, la educación que es tan importante, la salud y el Ministerio de la Mujer y todo lo que tiene que ver con la producción de alimentos, que es el Ministerio de Agricultura, son los que tienen menos presupuesto y menos atención. Entonces aquí tenemos a la ministra de Derechos Humanos del Ecuador y no sé si en todas partes, por ejemplo, una mujer elegida ministra, o sea, en un cargo de poder, tiene una mirada de igualdad de género o no, porque cuando se participa en la distribución de los recursos, generalmente perdemos las mujeres, pierden las niñas, ¿no? Eso es un aspecto que nos interesaría tener clarísimo compromiso de hacer visible en los programas nacionales el cumplir con los compromisos de lograr la igualdad de género. Desde los mecanismos internacionales es necesario igual esta construcción de alianza cuando hablamos de violencias, violencia sexual, violencia. ¿Cómo es que las niñas indígenas o las niñas discapacitadas son las que están en peor situación frente a la justicia y frente al derecho de ser respetadas? Entonces, hay necesidad de incluir, por ejemplo, que ahora como estamos hablando de incluir una recomendación general para mujeres indígenas, niñas indígenas en el mecanismo de la CEDAW. ¿Por qué? Porque hay aspectos específicos que se necesitan tener en cuenta cuando miramos las interseccionalidades. Las oportunidades económicas. Casi hemos pasado como 20 años tratando de hacer entender que sí tenemos capacidad de administrar y manejar fondos. Y por eso pedimos mucha inversión en formación, porque nosotras mismas quisiéramos hacerlo, ¿no? Aprender a hacerlo. Y la tercera parte es cómo en esta diversidad se respetan y se escuchan las diversas agendas, las prioridades que cada cual tiene, ¿no? Muchas veces se vienen las agendas de arriba hacia abajo. Tenemos que construir agendas que se complementan, que se apoyan mutuamente y entender las prioridades justamente mirando las interseccionalidades, porque hay mujeres y niñas y niños que se están quedando atrás. Entonces, tenemos que mirarnos horizontalmente en esa diversidad. El aspecto educativo es muy importante y de formación. Lo que queremos hoy lograr es que también no seamos solo hablando entre nosotras. Tenemos que hacer que los que deciden la política en nuestros países y en el mundo vaya abriendo los oídos y la mente para ejercer el poder y hacer política de una manera más incluyente. En el caso, por ejemplo, en las comunidades indígenas, cuando uno habla del embarazo adolescente o de niñas que son entregadas muchas veces, adolescentes a personas mayores, los padres están escuchando en su lengua propia cuando vamos a las comunidades y ellos dicen, yo también soy padre de esa niña y por lo tanto necesito aprender que aunque en la práctica las niñas se embarazan a los 13 años, yo ahora quiero que mi hija aprenda otras cosas y sea profesional como las demás. Entonces, no es equivocado decir que hay necesidad de incluir a los liderazgos varones, pero tenemos que tener mucha atención en el sistema educativo público, porque es ahí donde las niñas y los niños van formándose para hacer que si vamos a seguir pensando que solo algunos y no incluimos en el sistema educativo el respeto que se debe tener, desarrollar entre niñas y niños y mejorar las calidades también de formación para todos, pues siempre estaremos repitiendo lo mismo. Ese sería más o menos mis aportes. Ya no podemos seguir trabajando aisladamente ni tampoco solo entre nosotras. Y solo los indígenas, ¿cuánto decimos nosotras? ¿Cómo transitamos las indígenas a entender también la dimensión intercultural en las relaciones políticas y en las relaciones económicas? Gracias.
Thank you, Tarsila. Really, really important points about the need for change at multiple levels. And the importance of, again, centering intersectionality in our work and bringing people into those conversations. Really appreciate that. Kituria, from your perspective, one or two things that are needed to support feminist movements and women's rights organizations?
For me, the answer is related to a 3R approach. In representation, there is a need to support a meaningful parity law. We need to be more than part of the statistic to legitimate democratic bodies. A commitment with a zebra electoral system that lays on equal opportunities instead on men approval is desirable. When at a global level, only 30% of scientists and researchers are women, we need to guarantee that women can have a vibrant voice in all decision-making, even related to the COVID-19. In resources, we need a fair and just resource allocation system, and we need to hold governments and grant capital accountable. There is a need to comply with gender disaggregation indicators when allocating resources, planning public service, and delivering results through reports. In realities, we first need to acknowledge that there is no participation without peace, no results without safety, and no sustainable development without inclusion. And if we want to make the world a better place, we need to acknowledge how these realities impact differently in women and men, and in women and women, in young women and old women. And if we can recognize this difference and barriers, let's value local knowledge instead of planning top-down. For instance, the moment we most need the National Peace Action Plan for Resolution 1325, it's locked under government desk only for donors to see. One-size-fits-all response is a gender-blind approach. So please, for donors and governments, stop bringing us pre-agreed and pre-approved project results, theories of change, and activities which do not represent our context. And for us, in the last 6 months, a platform called Mujeres Convida, there is Women with Life, they joined together 65 women feminist movements and women grassroots organizations from all generations, which I'm part of, have been trying to answer the very same question. And one of the things that our theory of change believes that although there is no magic answer we believe that if we map and amplify the voice and movements of women and their expertise from district level to capital cities, if we listen to each other and guarantee the security and protection of women rights defenders, and if we strengthen the capacities, knowledge, abilities of women organizations to produce and share data and evidence, if we open a sincere discussion on the meaning of sorority and solidarity without judgment, without policing each other or promoting stereotypes, but acknowledge that we are different, and so we can have a unique recipe or a roadmap on how women movement should act or behave, then perhaps we can institutionalize a women observatory engaging women from grassroots to central level to hold governments, national parliament, judicial system, private sector, and cooperation partners accountable, presenting a report on the situation of women with disaggregated data. I think even Generation Equality Forum should have this sense of accountability in which governments, all the parties can come together and say, what have we did after the last Generation Equality Forum? And how are we progressing to all the commitment we have assumed? So we believe with this observatory of women, or with generation equality being accountable, putting governments accountable for their commitments, engaging women from grassroots to central level with updated data, evidence, and reports on women, engaging all and accepting all the diversity of autonomous women voice in partnership with men organizations for change, then women can push for their own representativity at all levels, amplifying our voice to hold governments accountable. And as a result, we can influence, we can have a voice, and we can assure that all our experience and efforts can take us anywhere. So I think that if the streets are not safe nowadays, we need also to innovate and demonstrating online and joining our efforts for the women in Myanmar, for the women in Cabo Delgado, for women refugees around the world, and for the safety of all women rights defenders who are suffering from injustice right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mercy, your perspectives, one or two things that should be done to support feminist and women's rights organizations.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I'd firstly start with partnership. It's easy to say partnership, but what means, and I think it involves two important key elements, which is trust and transparency. This is very important to be highlighted because we are on the same path and we need to work together to ensure gender equality. It is not easy. It is quite easy to say, but it's quite difficult, and we need to be with each other, and we are part of the same puzzle. We complete each other, and we need to path alongside each other in order to achieve our goals. So I think this is particularly important. It was highlighted previously, but I think we need to focus furthermore on the education. It is particularly important, especially sexual reproductive health rights education. We have seen that many students and children are suffering due to the COVID pandemic from education, and we are one further step far away from achieving a fair education system for all. And I think it is also important to talk more and to involve all the other left behind groups. For example, we have marginalized groups, different communities, different levels, different hard to reach groups, different rural areas persons. So I think we really need to focus on engaging all in the same table as equal partners. This is particularly important.
Great. We have just 4.5 minutes left, but I do want to bring in some voices from the floor. And so I'm going to direct some questions at specific people here, and I'm going to ask you to answer in 30 seconds or less. Monica, this is for you. Governments and international foundations and other international partners are often criticized for supporting elitist feminist approaches that primarily empower women from certain socioeconomic backgrounds. to the expense of other women from less educated or wealthy groups or who are otherwise historically marginalized. How can feminist movements promote transformative change on this in particular? What are some of the key things?
Yo creo que la transformación debe ocurrir en dos niveles. En el primer nivel es desde la filantropía, desde los gobiernos y desde las fundaciones, entendiendo mejor quiénes son los actores que están dando las soluciones a diario y saliéndose un poco de su radar de confort para establecer nuevas relaciones con organizaciones que estén en los niveles locales o en los niveles nacionales. Por otro lado, creo que las organizaciones feministas también tienen una gran tarea de ser más incluyentes en sus realidades, para salirse también de sus áreas de confort de quienes componen esas organizaciones feministas, ¿verdad? Así que creo que la solución viene tanto del movimiento feminista como del mejor entendimiento de la comunidad de donantes.
I'm sorry, Monica, the English interpretation doesn't seem to be working. Could you just say in English, one or two of those points? I'm sorry about that.
Not a problem. I think that this is a two-way solution. On the one hand, we need foundations and bilateral institutions deepening their understanding about who the real actors are that are driving change at the local level and moving beyond their zones of comfort, so that they establish partnership with organizations with whom they don't usually establish partnership. And secondly, I think that the feminist movement has a responsibility to be more inclusive and expand the notion of who belongs to the multiple expressions of the feminist movement, with a deep understanding that for a long time, it has mostly been left to be in the hands of white women. And that has to change if we want solutions to be different. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica. And that does bring me to another question that was asked. How can feminist movements promote inclusion? What do we need to do to agree on an agenda that's based on inclusion without discrimination and that is really centering Indigenous women, Afro-descendant women, women with disabilities, sex workers, and others? Tarsila, do you want to take that one on?
Me gustaría que pudiéramos entender que no hay una sola forma de luchar contra la desigualdad y que hay esas múltiples diversidades luchando para el cambio y la justicia sin autodefinición, porque cuando se habla de feminismo, por ejemplo, en sectores indígenas, el concepto de feminismo está prejuiciado y hay que desprejuiciar el feminismo. Y hay que decodificar también nuestra acción en relación a la diferencia y el poder, porque lamentablemente se nos ve quiénes son las feministas. Son las señoras blancas, académicas, de poder, relacionadas con el poder, intelectuales. Y cuando nosotras, como indígenas o diversidades de base, empezamos a luchar por nuestros derechos y alguien nos tipifica feminista, pues ya estamos prejuiciadas. 1. 2, que hablando de las oportunidades en fondos, muchas veces se dice, estos fondos son solo para el movimiento feminista o líderes feministas. Y entonces es una barrera, porque si no me autodefino feminista, no accedo, ¿no? o no tengo esto, pero soy parte de esa diversidad que lucha.
Muchas gracias, Tarsila. We are out of time, so I'm just going to sum up really quickly some of the key things that we heard from this panel. And thank you so much to all of the panelists for sharing your experiences and for your wisdom. One, feminist and women's rights and grassroots movements are the critical factor in driving change. Two, women's rights organizations need unrestricted, reliable, sustainable funding that's trust-based, that enables them to address the priorities that they identify as being needed to mobilize change. Three, we need to recognize our diversity to celebrate it, but also recognize how colonialism and racism show up, even within our own movements, and intentionally redistribute power within them so that our agendas are truly intersectional. And finally, the power of coalitions. It's this power of coalition building and collaborative action that we're really seeking to harness over the next 5 years with the Generation Equality Forums and the Action Coalitions. And I really do believe that we have this unprecedented opportunity to be able to take on really critical challenges that are still facing women, girls, and gender diverse people around the world. So let's go forward and do it. Thank you so much to everybody for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Gracias.
Great job, Shannon.
Thank you very much.
Gracias.
Gracias a
Thank
todos.
you.
Gracias.
Gracias, doña Cecilia, Mónica, maravillosa, Shannon, muy bien. Y Mercy, nos entendemos en los temas. Y con Quiteria, maravillosa, joven. Me quedó preguntar cuántos años tiene. How old are you? Quiteria, how old are you?
Mercy, how old are you?
Oh, okay. I'm 29.
Ah, ya.
29. I was thinking 16.
Todavía es joven.
Sí.
Todavía es joven.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
Gracias,
Shannon.
Mónica.
Thank you, Cecilia.
Preciosas las exposiciones.
Okay, bye.
Gracias.
Bye.